Hello and welcome to Alaska's Political Pipeline. I'm political reporter Wil Courtney. As of recording, the date is November 10th, 2025, and the time of recording is 11:52 a.m. That's an important disclaimer because the news might change quite rapidly this week. We're coming off the tails of some pretty massive news we saw over the weekend, some of the first big steps towards ending the government shutdown. And over this week, we will probably have more episodes sitting down with some lawmakers, sitting down with stakeholders. Who knows? Like, we're definitely working towards getting some of those voices on the show. But what I wanted to do today is take a break from that and talk to you a little bit about what this moment kind of means and explain it in a way that hopefully makes it a little less complicated, because the moment we're in is a little bit complicated and how it impacts you might be a little bit different from other people. So let's kind of start from the top, a little bit about the moment we're in right now. Last night, you had this Senate amendment that was struck by Senate Democrats with the GOP, with GOP Republicans in the Senate to try and move towards ending this government shutdown, get past the filibuster. To kind of briefly explain the filibuster, what the Senate needs is 50 votes to pass a normal bill, right? What the filibuster does is it increases that to 60. Now, Republicans, even though they're in the majority, don't have 60 members, so they're not filibusterable. They can't beat the filibuster just on their own members. So what needs to happen is Senate Democrats need to come to the table, at least in some way, to get past the filibuster. That's been this major, big playholder, this big stakeholder for how to get past this moment we're currently in. This seems to be that moment that these Senate Democrats, I believe 8 of them, including Senator Dick Durbin, they were able to strike this deal with the GOP, and now we seem to be able to get past the filibuster. What it does, though, is it's a different bill, essentially. It's a Senate amendment, and now that's not what the House passed. So the bill in the Senate needs to go back to the House, which will need to be signed by the president. And once the president signs it, the government shutdown is over. The government is going to be funded. And the things that are in this current Senate bill, the Senate version of the House bill, rather, that's going to be law. That's going to be what we're working under. Now, what the big really policy play at hand, and the whole reason that we've been in this historic 41-day government shutdown, it'll likely be longer. I'll go into that a little bit later. The big moving part has been these enhanced healthcare premiums, these Obamacare premiums, the Affordable Care Act premiums, and that's what these Democrats have been fighting for this whole time. What's not in this Senate amendment are any really protections for those. They expire in December, and what it essentially does, and I have some data here from the Kaiser Family Foundation. I got the chance to speak to Senator Sullivan about these premiums, his thoughts on them, because obviously these are a big moving part of the shutdown. These are like about the whole reason the shutdown has gone on for so long, at least according to Senate Democrats on the floor, right? These are things that are going to make the cost of healthcare in Alaska more expensive once they expire. So, I just ran a couple numbers. I'll briefly kind of go through them. But for a 35-year-old who uses these enhanced premium tax credits, which are, I believe, the most of people who utilize the Affordable Care Act, for a 35-year-old who makes $50,000 per year, the cost of a silver plan is going to be $176 a month. That's about 4.23% of their household income. That will increase without these enhanced premium tax credits, which happen around 2020, to $359 per month. That's $4,305 per year, 8.61% of their household income. Going on to a 35-year-old who makes $80,000 per year. The cost of silver plan, $567 per month. That increases to $979. It's just shy of doubling. And then going forward with probably one of the more expensive, the more pricier hikes for two 35-year-olds, so a household of 2 with 2 kids, they make $80,000 a year combined. Their price is $131 per month. That increases to $437 per month. That's $5,240 per year. That's 6.55%. That triples, right? So you had these in play. These were not a part of that Senate amendment. And really what is at play is now a promise. Now that's a little bit of the politics. I didn't want to go super heavy into it. I realized that I kind of went a little bit deeper than I maybe wanted to, but hopefully that gives you an idea of that moment of, you know, how we reached where we're at, why there's been this shutdown for so long. But let's go into how it impacts you, right? That's really important. There are several different things. I'm going to go bullet point by bullet point. For extended coverage, of course, I definitely recommend you go visit our website, alaskasnewssource.com. We go really in depth on a lot of these. I'm just not going to be able to, you know, in full, probably the way that maybe you want. But I really just want to hit them on the nose. But I think the first things first, I'm going to wrap everything kind of in a blanket statement. I'm going to go more in depth on all of these, but to wrap it all in a blanket statement, you're not really going to see a lot of movement on any of these until the government shutdown ends. You may see certain things happen, especially we'll go into SNAP. There's a lot moving with SNAP, but you know, as for really substantive movement, funding, you're likely not going to see that until the government shutdown actually ends, which that's my next point. Even though we saw this movement today, last night, you know, the government shutdown is not ending today. The Senate still needs to vote to pass this Senate amendment. It needs to move out of the Senate, it needs to move to the House, and it needs to move to the President. That's not a quick process. It can happen quickly, but it's not going to happen all that quick. So we'll have to see how quickly these things move. But you know, the government shutdown is not ending today. It likely won't end Tuesday. Wednesday, you know, maybe we'll have to just kind of see how quickly these things move, because it could take a while. I can't tell you how long it's going to take because I personally don't even know yet. So that's where things currently stand on that front. Now, as for how things are going to impact you, this is important, right? So federal worker pay, that's been one of the biggest things about the government shutdown that's been impacting Alaskans. There's 66,000 Alaskans who, or excuse me, that's a whole different number. I believe there's about 15,000 federal workers in Alaska. I don't even believe that includes military. But military federal workers do not get paid during the government shutdown. That's going to stay the case until it ends. You have seen military workers get paid from the president, from diverted funding, reallocated funding, but you know, these federal workers aren't going to continue not to get paid until the government shutdown ends, until the government is actually funded. You've seen things probably at the airport about TSA, about air traffic control. Those are people who aren't getting funded as well, right? And you've seen even here in Anchorage, the Ted Stevens International Airport, that's a part of one of 40 airports across the country who have been, whose flights have been reduced by 10%. That's the latest when it comes to air travel, but I mean, that's just one of the impacts of the government shutdown, right? That's where things kind of stand on that front. But this big battle, this back and forth between the state and the federal government has been with SNAP. And we've really seen that kind of play out over the weekend quite dramatically. You know, I've been covering it for the last, I don't even know, like ever since it started, because this has been one of those big, really fighting points, these dramatic moments. I mentioned 66,000 earlier. That's how many Alaskans are impacted by the SNAP cuts. SNAP ran out of funding, I believe, in the beginning of November. We're now November 10th, so there's been 10 days of this push to try and fund SNAP. You saw the president have some sort of partial funding. We got to confirm from the governor's spokesperson just yesterday that $5 billion in federal funds were approved by the Trump administration and were loaded onto EBT cards last week. Now, those were not affected by the news we heard over the weekend, where the Trump administration told states to undo full benefits paid by judicial orders last week. And it's just been this back and forth of the courts say this, the Trump administration's pushing for this, and states are trying to do something else. You've seen Governor Dunleavy, alongside legislative leaders, push for $10 million to be funded in SNAP for the month of November, which has been substantial. The $10 million is at most funding, and it's not all directed towards SNAP necessarily. In the in the governor's letter, he said $5 million is going to be at most dedicated towards loading cards, and $10 million at most for food bank resources. Now, where does that kind of mean if the governor said that, well, I'm going to only spend $10 million at most? What that essentially means is maybe the formula, and we'll have to figure out, like, actually once this funding comes through, which is not totally, we don't really know how it's all playing out currently. We're working to kind of learn a little bit more about that. But if 10 million is at most what's going to be paid, maybe you do 5 million for food banks and 5 million for loading cards. Maybe you do 2.5 for loading cards and 7.5 for food bank resources. We'll have to kind of see how that actually kind of turns out, and we'll update you once we learn more about that. But you have these really contentious issues with SNAP that is playing out between federal courts, between the Trump administration, between states. And how that's playing out is something that's unfolding before our eyes. And in the meantime, you have these 66,000 Alaskans who are being impacted by these decisions as they're moving through. So that's some of the latest about where things currently stand with the government shutdown. Just to go back to what I talked about at the beginning of this show, what's next? We are at this moment where the Senate amendment was, it seems like we're moving forward with this. It's passed the filibuster test. It's received 60 votes. There's still 40 holdout Senate Democrat votes. I believe maybe one Republican vote still. Senator Rand Paul, I still believe he's voting against it. And you just have this moment of how do we move forward? Well, it seems like it's possible. It seems like there is momentum to move forward, that come a vote, which could happen today. I'm hearing that it could happen today on November 10th. There could be a vote from the Senate to push this onto the House, back onto the House. It'll go from the Senate to the House to the President. And then once the President signs it, then that is how things move forward. Thank you for listening to Alaska's Political Pipeline. If you like what you listen to, consider rating our podcast and giving us a follow. We'll be back in your feeds next Monday, but until then, please